All right, welcome back to the podcast and back to Theory and Theology. On this podcast, we're still kind of talking about things going on around this season. Let me see. I've been bouncing back and forth between some of the Bible related readings in John about Jesus, about this time period, because I mentioned before that the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah is over, and then before that there was Sukkot, and that's over. This passage in the book of John is quite lengthy, and I'm not too sure. Some of it kind of alludes to, okay, this is the next day, and that's the next day, or it kind of seems like it's not all happening in one day. But there was kind of something that was coming to my mind that was interesting, just from kind of other historical readings that I kind of noticed, just about Jesus in general as a Jewish person. Something that's kind of sticking out to me is that he must have been traditionally acceptable to some extent to be able to be teaching in the temple, to be able to be teaching people, and to have been able to live as long as he did teaching people, as well as, there's this kind of a sentence, a phrase or a sentence that said, how was it worded? Like something about judging by the flesh or something like that. Like, it kind of just reminds me of just kind of like, I think we've all been there, when the ego kind of gets involved with an argument or a disagreement or not seeing eye to eye on something. And I think it can be very easy to be like, just in this other kind of mindset that's not helpful for open-mindedness, and just not trying to be, like caring or understanding or listening. And it usually comes with a lot of bitterness and anger, I've noticed too, when it's like you see it a lot in religious debates, you see it a lot in political debates, and I don't even mean like from a professional stance, like rabbis and priests arguing, or like whatever, like, or like politicians arguing. I just mean like person to person. There's always going to be like people who see differently. And like I can remember being like during the pandemic, for example, like I have a friend that, this isn't like, it was during like the part of the pandemic where Black Lives Matter, the movement was getting pretty intensified, especially in cities. And, there was a lot of protesting and different things like that. And I know the media was kind of shining more light on what do you call, like, not just the protests, but the, like how there were some riots and maybe some looting and things like that. And then there was this kind of idea of like, okay, we're like, I remember hearing that there were some kind of implanted people who were kind of like, creating chaos. And this wasn't the common protesters, the common people who were trying to have their voices heard, their ideas heard, for equality and things like that. Like, it was some other people who, politicians had maybe hired or encouraged to kind of like create this image that the media would see as just like, oh, like the blacks are out there being crazy, kind of thing. And then, police getting involved in all this kind of, like, there was a curfew and all. It was crazy. And it's like, but I remember talking to somebody about this that, totally was not, seeing the big picture of things. And they were, going off about like, and this isn't the first time I've heard this, but people that just don't really understand like systemic racism and all these other types of things, that are just like, oh, well, like people saying things like, oh, black people in poverty and like it's their fault or like whatever. And it's kind of like, whatever. I'm not going to go into a whole like rant about it, but it's like sometimes when there's those types of discussions, it's like, we're going nowhere with this, right? Like, this isn't really something that the person is willing to listen or hear or try to understand. They're angry about it and they feel some kind of way. They feel like attacked about their race because maybe if they're not a black person and they feel like, okay, if I'm a white person and I feel like people are blaming me and angry, at me being white. And it's like, well, you specifically aren't doing anything wrong. If you're not doing something wrong, then you don't have anything to worry about. And, I know plenty of white people that, were out there protesting too, like friends and everything. So it's like, sometimes it's kind of like, okay, do people believe in equality? Do they not believe in it? Just trying to hear other people's perspectives sometimes can be like kind of hard. And I feel like with politics, with religion, this type of thing happens very, very, very often. You hear people just wanting to fight about everything. And I know too, in Jewish culture, it's not uncommon to have a person who, like a type of debate, like a type of discussion. I feel like Christianity isn't so much that way. Like, traditionally, it's like people go to church, they listen, but there's not really too much of a learning culture, I guess. Like, I know in Judaism, and I don't know how far this goes back, but in Judaism, there's this culture of, something called like a chavrusa, and like, through yeshiva, you get kind of like, because it's very organized, as far as like the learning part. So like I mentioned, like, during the time near Simchat Torah, that's when the Torah portion, like those holy days are over. The Torah portion's about to begin again from the beginning of Genesis, and then the readings start over again for the whole lunar year, all the way up until, this time period again next year. And of course the dates change. All the dates change because it's based on a lunar cycle. And so, I mean, you can look up the dates, but it's like the dates of Simchat Torah, the dates of, Sukkot, the dates of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, like those dates are different, versus like, the other calendar where it's like the Gregorian calendar where, Halloween, for example, is October 31st. It's always October 31st. And so that's one difference that I noticed. And so, like, if you've ever, I mean, I don't like basing everything on movies, but I feel like for people who don't want to go and study like classic history, if you know the movies like musicals like Fiddler on the Roof or Yentl, you see themes of, Jewish study, like, that popular song where is his name Tevier? I can't remember his name, but how he's singing, if I was a rich man, I would study the holy books and like that kind of thing. It's kind of like there's this culture where it's like, if you have the means or the support or the financial success, you culturally are able to have more time to study, all of, like, there's a lot of stuff to study in Judaism. It's not just the Torah. There's like a lot of other rabbinical teachings and all these things. There's like a whole schedule. If you go on 770 Live or Chabad or almost most synagogue websites will have at least the basic parsha, if not multiple types of readings like the Tanya and the Psalms and the multiple types of readings that you can engage with every single day. Like if you were to read that every day, it takes hours, to actually follow it. Like it's not like commanded to have to do it all, but it's like if you are really studying like that, there's like a planned out schedule that you can do every year. I feel like Christianity doesn't have that. Like people kind of read what they're reading, if they're reading, and then they go to church. And then other than when like Christian holidays come up, you don't really see people talking too much about the same topics. It's like, yeah, Easter, everyone's going to talk about that. Christmas, everyone's going to talk about that. Thanksgiving, there might be something, even though it's not necessarily a Christian holiday. And like, Christians don't have that many holidays really. But yeah, like it's kind of different, right? So, you see that kind of aspect of study, that kind of, that kind of culture of like studying and people like involving themselves with one another and just mostly the studying culture, and even like how many times in the New Testament does it even say, like how did like when referring to Jesus, there's a lot of times that the religious leaders are saying like, how does he know all this? Like he didn't go to school, or he didn't learn, or where did he learn these things? He's from like he's from Nazareth, or like from Galilee, or there's always these debates about like how does he even know all this stuff. And then there is this kind of historically people say that Jesus was learning from Hillel, who was a person at the time whose teachings were not learn. I don't know if it was learning directly from Hillel, learning directly from that rabbi, but that rabbi's teachings were very popular. And so people who are very familiar with Hillel can, read, what Jesus says. But usually those people who are familiar with Hillel aren't usually reading the New Testament with Jesus in it. Like usually it's a different type of religious Jewish person that doesn't believe in Jesus that's familiar with Hillel. And usually in Christianity, you're not like hearing anything about Hillel. And so, but yeah, like I'm just mentioning it to say that like there's this culture with like the teachings and the rabbinical teachings that people follow. I guess they call it like the yoke of the rabbi. Like, how you put like a yoke, like an oxen yoke, to kind of put one oxen with the other oxen, and then they just, one of them guides the other one, like that kind of thing. And so I just find it interesting that, that section of John has Jesus talking a lot about all different types of topics. It's like every paragraph is like it's just very confusing, in my opinion. It's like nothing straightforward. The way that he's speaking doesn't seem, it's just I mean, okay. So when you read something and it's like it's a different style of speaking. So the writer is writing, kind of like narrating what's going on, like Jesus went here and did this or whatever it may be, and then you hear Jesus' words, and it's just like, what? Like, what is he talking about? Like, where did he bring up this topic from? And why is he talking about this? And it always sounds like it's in some kind of riddles almost. And it's just different topic after topic. And it's a lot of information. So it's hard to tell, like, is this happening back to back in the same day? Or these, like, multiple different days? Because it seems like it's spread out. Maybe it's possibly spread out, or it's possibly all within that time period. But even like, I don't know, like I was saying, I don't know how long ago the tradition of having a chavrusa started, but a chavrusa basically, like, if you're in the yeshiva and if you're studying in the yeshiva, like, you don't have to be trying to get a rabbinical degree or become a rabbi officially, but you can still study in the yeshiva, and as a Jewish person, and go there every day. I know 770 Live has a live stream of the yeshiva there at Chabad, where you can go online and just see, like, the cameras of people just, like, studying, and it's like they're either studying or they're dancing, or there's some kind of like a speech going on and people are listening or whatever, but there's almost always something going on. But it's no longer available on, like, Sabbath and certain, like, Jewish holy days. It's not available anymore. It used to be available all the time, but now it's not. And it's just very interesting to me that you can see, people always studying in there, and it doesn't really say exactly what people are studying. It's like it's groups of people, and people are there studying, sometimes solo, sometimes in groups, sometimes in pairs, and it's a very studious culture. Not everybody's always doing it, but it's an individual practice. But I feel like Christianity doesn't have that. Not in that way, not where it's like you can go to, like, almost any city and find a place where Jewish people can go and, like, study. That's not very common in Christianity like that. And so I find it interesting that it does exist in Judaism, and that there is this kind of, like, culture of study and speaking and being able to, like, talk, and, like, different types of, I'm not going to go into the different types of learning and studying, but part of it one of the types of studying does include, like, a form of, like, speaking to one another, like, almost not necessarily to fight, but in, like, this debate kind of form. So even in the Bible, it's kind of interesting when we see, like, Jesus talking, and then other people are, like, commenting, and then you have, like, the priests and the chief priests and the temple police and the Pharisees and Sadducees and all these other scribes and all these other people who are always just there, like, saying something. It's like, that sounds like it would be a common thing. It sounds like it wouldn't be out of the norm culturally to have people just actually discussing different things. And some Bibles, I actually like the ones that have the footnotes that actually have, like, the references to, like, where something is said somewhere else. Like, it'll be, like, from Isaiah or from Malachi or, like, whatever. And, like, sometimes, like, when you see certain things that Jesus might say, it's, like, referenced somewhere else in the Old Testament. And it's just interesting to me. Just the whole learning culture of everything is just interesting to me, because it's kind of like looking at it in a different light. When people as Christians read the New Testament, it's usually like, oh, these people are bad guys, and the Pharisees and all these people are evil against Jesus. But I was thinking about it, and I was like, maybe they were picking on him, but also he was in the temple teaching too. And so it's like, to be able to be in the temple, I mean, that's different. I mean, there's history about even like John the Baptist in the wilderness and things like that. A lot of the people who potentially could have come out into the wilderness with John the Baptist to get baptized by him, people say that according to Bruce Chilton, it's possible that those people weren't allowed to come into the temple for some reason or another. Either they weren't considered good enough, or they weren't following the commandments, or they had some kind of something that like there are multiple reasons in the Old Testament why somebody can't come into the temple. Like women menstruating, or if you didn't go to the mikvah, and to be able to go to the mikvah you have which is like a ritual bath, to be able to go to that you have to have all these other qualities like in place, and so so it seems like Jesus was allowed. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is like it seems like in his life, something that I maybe wasn't catching on to until maybe recently was that Jesus was kind of like allowed to come in. He was in good standing with the religious leaders at the time, enough so to be able to get into the temple, to be able to be in there teaching. They were arguing, and they didn't always see eye to eye, and there was some speculation and some concern about his teachings and things like that, but usually the beginning questions were, how did he learn all this? It wasn't he's wrong. It's like, how did he learn all this? Where does he know all this from? Like, they weren't initially saying, oh, this guy's wrong and he's completely false. It seems like eventually there might have been some form of a jealousy or envy or bitterness or some ego involved that were making the religious leaders of the time start to react like they did, and all this stuff about like kings and messiahs and the Son of God and coming from heaven and all these other things those were the things that seemed to kind of get the leaders of the day more angered, and there was that conflict with Jesus and the religious leaders, it seemed like, for those reasons. But yeah, I'm still slowly kind of looking at those types of topics, just because I find it of interest to myself, and just it's like a time period thing. I'm kind of like, well, this is like the time period that this is the time period where this kind of stuff would have been happening. That's kind of why I started reading it, is because of Simchat Torah passing, Sukkot passing, and then Simchat Torah. It's like this is about the time period where Jesus in the book of John would have been saying that kind of stuff. I'm not fully sure about the timeline of what he's speaking about, like, because it doesn't really separate it out, like, okay, then the next day, and then the next day. Like, it shows him, saying he's not going to go to the Festival of Sukkot celebration. He ends up going secretly, and then about midway, he starts teaching, and then on the last day, he's also teaching. And then it sounds like after that last day, there was a day following that he was teaching, because it sounded like, they said that everyone went one way, and he went to the Mount of Olives or whatever, wherever he went somewhere almost implying that it was maybe another day. But then there's all these different paragraphs after that portion where it's like him talking about these different topics all of a sudden. And there's this kind of, the people believing and the people saying, like, should we believe, should we not believe, trying to make up their minds, and then the religious leaders trying to make up their minds. And then there's this kind of also at the same time this simultaneous concern about, like, should he be arrested, should he be killed, like, because of these types of things. Like, is he saying accurate things, is he not saying accurate things? So at least according to the book of John so far, it doesn't seem like people are saying they've all concluded that he's saying the wrong things. It sounds like they're having trouble trying to catch Jesus and saying something wrong. But then there's also this idea that they don't want him around, even though he's not saying something wrong. They're trying to, like, catch him. And it's just interesting to try to look at a story from that perspective, right? And be like, what is going on? Like, that's kind of how, when I'm reading it, I'm like, what is going on here? Like, it's just kind of like an interesting thing. But yeah, like, I mean, it sounds like Jesus knows what he's talking about, and he's talking basically to Jews. He's talking to Jewish people, and the Jewish people are like, oh, like, is this accurate? Is that accurate? Like, if you think about, if a lot of these people had been learning since their youth, they would know a lot of this stuff. They would know, oh, like, that's false, or this is false, or that's true. But when you have somebody saying false stuff in the religion at that time period, that's definitely not good. Like, people don't, take that lightly. But it doesn't sound like he's saying false stuff. He's just saying stuff that's hard to hear or difficult to understand, and kind of challenging people on, like, you should understand. Like, it's kind of like this challenge between, like, do you really not understand what I'm saying, or do you not want to understand what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like when, I don't know how to explain this example, but like, it's almost like when you, I don't know, like, I don't know what I don't know how to describe this, but I think a lot of people experience this, where it's like, there's a truth that you don't want to know, like, I don't know a good example, but it's kind of like, I think everyone kind of has that in their life on occasion, where it's like, there's a truth that you don't want to know, or like an idea or something that comes across where you're just like, I don't want to change my thinking on that. It's too complicated, like, it's too difficult of a topic to touch. It makes me think different. It makes me think weird. I feel like it happens, like, all the time in, like, for example, maybe like couples therapy. One spouse is trying to speak to, their experiences of how come things aren't going very well. And then, the other partner is like, wait, like either like trying to lie about it and like, oh, that didn't really happen, or like, like gaslighting, or being like, that didn't really happen, or like some form of like denial, or you know, or even like when people are telling stories about either about their life or about certain experiences, you know, sometimes when people are telling stories, you know, they might tell like a very incorrect, inaccurate story, inaccurate version of something. You know, like, I don't know, like it just seems kind of like it's along those same lines, where it's like the religious leaders of the time were kind of like, you know, not necessarily not believing Jesus. It's just that they were not wanting to, or you know, because they were seeing and hearing him, and seeing and hearing what he was saying and everything. They were, I don't remember if there's a part of the Bible where they're like, he's not allowed in the temple anymore. I mean, he was always allowed in, from what I remember. And so it's like, well, to be allowed in, you have to have like a certain standing. Like, if people really think you're some evil person or some false person or some kind of deceitful person, there, you know, you're not going to be allowed to be in there, let alone teaching in there. You know, that would have been nipped real quick. They would not allow that to keep happening. And so, yeah, it's just kind of thoughts that kind of come up with this whole time period with the book of John anyways. I don't think I'm going through the whole entire book of John, but I mean, I don't know how to get the time periods right, but it's all technically this kind of time period. I mean, I like this. I like trying to stay kind of a little bit connected to certain times of year. But I don't really I'm not a big Halloween person, you know, so it's kind of hard for me to be all like pumped up about Halloween. And so I'd rather study like paganism and, you know, Jewish holidays as well. And, you know, like, I'm not saying that I'm, you know, against Halloween. It's just not something that I need, you know. Like, I think I don't know, from like the supernatural perspectives of things, you know, when people talk about Halloween, they're always like, oh, it's when the veil is open and all the supernatural related things kind of have like a closer opportunity to get like interacting with humans. Like, I don't think I want that, you know. I don't want to interact with those things. You know, it's kind of a choice that I don't really want to, and so I just don't really necessarily like traditionally celebrate any of it. But I don't like completely do nothing. I'm not just like sitting home and like doing absolutely nothing. Like, for me, this is a lot more fun, you know. I'd rather just study paganism and study Jewish holidays and all that kind of stuff. Like, to me, that's a lot more fun, to study history and all that kind of thing. And yeah, so I guess that's kind of all I had to say about that. I mean, I wasn't even going to go that route. I was actually going to talk about paganism themes in Game of Thrones, because my stress levels have definitely gone down, and so I can watch some more intensive stuff that I don't normally watch. And for that reason, you know, I've been kind of back to watching Game of Thrones, and I feel like that's kind of fitting for the time period, you know. And it's you know, a lot of it about the old gods and then the new god of light and all this kind of stuff. You know, there's like themes like that kind of come up. as well as all these like complex like wars and things. But um, I am not sure. I mean, I'd have to read more into it, but I think Game of Thrones might have some kind of pagan theme to it. Um, Especially with the time period. I mean, like, of course, it's not like real history, but just like the way that some of the gods are, how there's like the trees and like the, out in the forest and all this kind of stuff. That to me does sound similar to a lot of stuff that I was learning through studying about what this Wisdom of Odin channel was saying about Norse paganism. And, I mean, it's not all like specifically like a religious series, but I'm definitely seeing themes, the settings being in like certain areas of like Europe, and all these different kind of themes of that time period where there would have been probably predominantly pagan related gods and just a lot of pagan beliefs and practices. But I don't know how accurate it is. I mean, a lot of times when they have like, Vikings and, all these different types of groups of people, I've heard that, a lot of it's historically inaccurate a lot of times too. So, I mean, I'm so new to all this studying about paganism stuff that it's just like a jumble of things that I'm not very well versed in compared to like Judaism. Like, I've studied Judaism since probably like high school, and I've, been pretty involved with that kind of studying. So I have a better foundation with that. But it's not like paganism never came up. It was more like stay away from it. That was the message I always got, was stay away from it. And so, of course, me being me, I never fully stayed away from it, because I was like, whenever somebody tells me to stay away from something, I'm like, well, why? Why should I stay away from it? Like, why can't I learn about this thing that people say stay away from? What's so wrong with learning about like a different culture? Especially when, I was raised in a religion where, it came up a lot. Like, people talked about it, but then they're like, but don't study it, and don't dabble with any of it because it's wrong and evil and bad. And I'm just like, but I don't even really know pagans, like, I don't really know any pagan people, from the people it seems like online. It seems like their beliefs are very similar to Christian traditions and things, and not as different as people are trying to make them seem. I think the maybe one difference is like the ancestral god aspect of things. Like people who are maybe Scandinavian or from certain like cultural backgrounds from certain countries like Germany or wherever, their ancestral, traditions of gods and things, I mean, they can like link their own like identity to like what their ancient ancestors were doing, versus like a lot of other people, maybe they convert into different types of paganism, or maybe I have heard about like there being kind of like, in a way, like maybe like a white supremacy, like not like that. I don't know, I'm just saying what I've heard about like that aspect of white supremacy with like and I'm not even saying like in a bad way, just kind of more like pride, like a pride in like culture, like the white cultural like ancestral background. Because technically, if these people are tracing back to like their ancestral heritage of like religion, and trying to practice what their ancestors kind of were worshiping and stuff like that, it seems more like they would like they would uh they would practice it, and there would likely it would likely be linked to their ancestors being introduced to this, where it would be like a racial and ethnic type of a thing. And then it seems like in modern culture, there's some questioning between like people who convert from whatever, racial or ethnic background compared to the people who are actually using the religion, tracing it back to their actual heritage. That's kind of what I mean by white supremacy. I don't want to, I don't see anything wrong with white people having pride in their culture. I think it's different though when people, any group thinks that they're better or above any other group of ethnicities or races. That's kind of more so where I have a problem, when it's like not equal, like where there's not equality being taught. But I can't speak to that. I can't say that they're not teaching equality or that they're not talking about that. But it does seem like there is some room for some prejudice in some groups, like I can't say it's everybody, but it is a theme that's come up more than once, reading through like chat rooms and like comments and stuff where people are like, oh, like I'm this race or I'm that race, and then some people have something different to say about that. Some people are like okay with it, and then other people are like you kind of can't come up in here, this is our space. And I kind of get it, I kind of get it. Like I'm thinking like like tribal religions in Africa, those would be traced back to different ethnicities and racial groups. And if there were other groups that were trying to come in and just like start practicing it, I could see how there could be some pushback about like different races coming in and being like, oh, I want to practice this religion or whatever. And then it's like there might be some discomfort from some people, I can understand that. I mean, I'm not here to say one way or another. I mean, I feel like Judaism kind of has that in there too. It's kind of like like, yeah, you can convert to Judaism, but there's a bloodline involved, and it's very specific with the bloodlines and things. And so like you can convert, but the bloodline is still important in Judaism, and they do like to know like the bloodline lineages and things like that of who's Jewish. That's not uncommon in tribal religions. And so I wouldn't say that there's anything really wrong with that, but I'm not from a background where I've been like actively involved with any groups that were really like ethnically just like, okay, you have to be this or else you can't come in. So I don't really know what that's like, but all right, well, I gotta start working. I don't want to. I'd rather just be recording this stuff all day, but that's kind of as far as I've gotten for the moment in time, and thank you for listening.